Andy, thanks for jumping on the People Just Like You interview series. I've got a few questions that I'd love to ask you and have the readers as well as myself learn a little bit more about you. Would love to know if you want to tell me something interesting about yourself.
I think what's interesting about me, or what would be interesting to see in other people that I think that I do, is I always play devil's advocate in thought processes. So if I see something negative or see somebody do something wrong, I'm usually like trying to defend them, even though I know that it doesn't match my view, because I want
Mm.
to see why they went through that thing.
Mm.
And so I find that interesting in other people, so I try to emulate that in myself. So I think that's probably what's most interesting about me, because I feel like, especially this day and age, people don't do that, or it doesn't seem like
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Have you always done this, or do you feel like you started to do this at a certain point, some experience, and
Yeah,
caused you to flip to this?
it was basically, I want to say, like after I started going to school, I think, because school forces you to like think in abstract ways. And when I was very much, you go on Instagram and you see like these different disinformation people just spreading like just stuff that's just factually not true. And you don't you don't really want to argue with them because you know it's a waste of time. But you also know that why they think that way. So you like so I usually just ignore those things, but in the past, I would be argumentative. I would take a stance. I would argue the points, and like generally, that's not how even if you wanted to convince people that your position is right, even if if you could somehow figure out that what you're saying or what you're thinking is absolutely 100% true, still not the right way to go about like changing someone's mind. And
Mm.
over when I was going to school, you start thinking about different ways or different topics, and like sociological topics or ethical topics, and you start pondering what the other side looks like, or you get into these exercises where you have to oppose your position instead of defend it. And then you start to become a little bit more open-minded. You start to be a little bit more humble, and um, so I think that's kind of where that came from. And it's why I think, like, as much as when you go into school and you do a program, and if you're doing biology or science and you just want to do those classes, it's why I think being forced to take like other classes that aren't necessarily something you're interested in really help you think differently,
Become more well-rounded.
yeah, exactly. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about from your experiences, you found that when you were forced to, through an exercise in the class, consider the other perspective, not only consider the other perspective, but argue for the opposite perspective, despite you wanted to, talk about the reasons for which, I don't know, climate change is real, and there's proof for it. If you were forced to discuss the other side of things, you wouldn't do that ordinarily, but that experience might give you more consideration and empathy for people that come from that perspective, and figure out how to discuss more with them. Just think from their shoes. And yeah, interesting.
That was actually, and it's funny that you say that, because I was just talking to Alyssa, my niece, about that. Like, I was talking to her about like the project that I had to do, because she was picking out her classes, and I was telling her about ethics and like sociology, or like kind of like poli sci. And one of the projects that I had, the reason why I know climate change is real is because one of the projects I had was to prove that climate change wasn't real, that global warming wasn't. And I had to write like a 10-page paper on it, and it was the hardest thing I ever had to do, because you're basically like, well, if it wasn't real, like this is, I guess this is how I would go about looking at it. And it
Yeah.
actually, when you go through that exercise and you still can't, like you're basically writing words on paper to justify how it wouldn't be real, and then you basically, most of the time you can understand the other side, but in that case it just solidified my opinion, or my factual opinion, opinion based on facts. So it's also a good way to figure out, like, do you really believe in the thing you think? So but yeah, it
Yeah.
was interesting you brought that one up, because that's exactly what I had to do.
Cool. I dig
Yeah.
it. Well, what was something recently in your life that inspired you?
I get inspired by like hardworking people, or people that just have the mental fortitude to keep pushing on when you're pushed to the brink. So you've got there's plenty of, you see it a lot in like weightlifting, you see it a lot in like athletes, um, but I think you can see it in everyday people too. So I mean, there's people like, I think me, I'm more of a generalist, or I'm somebody that I take multitasking to the extreme, because I can do like 3 or 4 things at once, and I'm just constantly bouncing, you know, back and forth with them. And sometimes it'll push my brain to the brink. But the guy that I work with, he's a father. He works in finance, and he's really passionate about like EV transition and renewable energy transition. And then
Mm-hmm.
during COVID, me and him kind of bonded, because we both had the same idea of like learning stock options right when the crash happened. And so he's learning stock options at night, being a good dad, like he's telling me, I'm with my kids, or I'm putting my kids to bed, or I'm reading my kids. And then I also see him at work, because I work with him, and he's trying to help people like me learn more things, teaching like classes for the company, doing his day job. And you're just like, when do you sleep, man? And like, he just pushes his body to the brink to better everybody around him, his kids, his wife, his family, his friends, his work colleagues. All of this selflessness you see in that, and that's inspiring, because when I was younger, I used to be a selfish person. And so now, as I get older, I'm trying to be more like that. And that
Mm.
is, that's like it's not, you know, people can push their mind to do things, people can push their body to do things, but he's like trying to push himself to be selfless. And that's, people do it with charity, but there's people like him that are needed in the world, because he's passing on his knowledge and just his personality to people. And I think that's important. So yeah.
So it's the motivation, the investment of one's own mind, body, soul into work that supports and benefits others, and
Yeah.
not just oneself. Not a selfish motivation. That's something that's really inspiring to you and this colleague of yours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it's, when people think about a better world for, or doing good things, they think about charity, they think about donating money, lending time at the local soup kitchen. And it's like, well, yes, you can do all of those things. All of them are valuable in their own right. But there are people that don't have parents that can pass knowledge down to them. I came from a tough upbringing. My parents came from a way tougher upbringing, and they didn't have a role model within the family that can progress them forward. So
Mm.
everything, you need people like that, like in this case, my friend Kevin, you need people like Kevin to push you forward, because when you don't have a role model at home, you need a role model outside of that. And sometimes it's a series of role models. I've had a series of role models where I basically imprint on them, from things that I see that they do well, and I basically steal a bit of that knowledge, steal a bit of that knowledge, and it's selfish in my own right. But every time I've done that, I've tried to pass that knowledge on along the way, and that's super inspiring to me, because there are a lot of people in broken homes that don't have that, and if we're not focusing on those people, it's just, it's just like not focusing on a poor neighborhood. Well, what do you think are in the poor neighborhoods? Kids without role models, kids that don't know a path, and that's so people like that are important. But yeah, so
Yeah.
that's hella inspiring for me.
Yeah. I'm inspired as well. I that resonates with me, the idea of needing and seeking a role model. And I think there are a lot of people that don't have good role models, and it's unfortunate, or they maybe sometimes don't think they need role models. They can do it all on their own, that they can figure everything out without anybody else's help. And that's a poor attitude to have, but one that's a bit immature and unexperienced. Eventually you realize that you can't do it all yourself. And, perhaps there's a bit of the culture that we're in, this like individualistic, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you can do anything, which absolutely is true. You can do anything. The American dream, while there's some criticism, against it, in terms of like systemic issues that maybe aren't being considered, with everybody's ability to achieve the American dream, there is still, this country is incredible for the amount of opportunity that you can get connected with, but to do it all in yourself without having a coach, an advisor, a role model, a therapist, a friend, a family member, somebody in your corner can help you when the times are getting tough, that's a misguided opinion or perspective, I think.
And when you think of like first generation Americans, they're not from here, and you start to wonder, like, wait, so how come the American dream works for people outside and of America, but people in America, it doesn't work for them? And then you start to look at like poor neighborhoods or poor kids, and a lot of times, unless they have an outside perspective or a role model outside of that neighborhood or outside of that socioeconomic status, they don't know a path forward, because you're in it and you're just trying to survive it. But then when you can force yourself to see an outside perspective, I think that helps you get out of that rut, because think of, so in some places we know more about a foreign place because we're reading about it objectively, because we're not biased towards it, that we can think clearly. And when you're in something, you usually are biased towards a certain thing, and so you can't think clearly. So having an outside perspective, builds that path. And that's my like, my retcon of like, maybe that's why the American dream only works for people outside of America coming in, because they're not clouded by the politics of America or a socioeconomic status or anything like that. They're like reading a book for the first time, and they're like, whoa, if I would have wrote this book, I would have done it like this. And then they just do that. So, but yeah.
Interesting. So shifting gears a little bit, where do you work right now?
Oh yeah, so I work at BP, and that's a tough question to answer, because a lot of people have their own opinion on it. But but yeah, I work for BP. I work as an analyst there, and generally, I think a lot of people give it grief because of all the things that have happened in the past. But I work there because I think the company is very different from where it was in that place. You've got, if you look at layoffs and things like that, we're completely a different company. It's a lot younger company in that you've got a lot of people with fresh ideas, and we really are trying to change the image that the oil industry has had in the past. I think the challenge forward is, you know, getting over the, doing the right thing. A lot of people think that it's just greenwashing and that we're not going to try to do the right thing, but it's ran by people like me that are trying to do something because we believe that, climate change is real. We believe that doing the same thing status quo isn't going to work. So, but yeah, kind of a loaded answer to a simple question, but I felt it was.
Yeah, well, I did see that BP, I think it was BP and Shell, the European countries, have set targets for at least through their own operations being greenhouse gas emission neutral by 2035 or something like that. And for an energy company to set goals like that, in contrast to an Exxon, an American company that was actually running a scenario of, well, what if we pumped another 12% greenhouse gases out? How would that affect our economics and our growth as other companies like BP and Shell are reducing their emissions?
Yeah, it's interesting because they've kind of just doubled down. It's just like they're just going forward and not trying to change. And I think I'm excited about it. It's a tough industry to stay in. There's been there's been numerous reorgs and things since I've been there, but a lot of times it's not just a BP thing. It's usually, if there's a reorg or layoffs that happen at BP, you typically see like Shell had layoffs beforehand or Exxon or, it's usually an industry thing because, over time, those huge companies, oil's not what it used to be anymore. So, the Titan is falling and we're going to have to disrupt ourselves and the plans that we've had laid out for this last year and coming is it's pretty exciting because I feel like I wonder if this is what it feels like to have been, a Netflix, disrupting themselves with streaming or Amazon disrupting themselves with e-commerce. The plans that we have laid out are really ambitious, and then internally it feels like we are trying to disrupt ourselves. If that's what we're going to do, I don't know. I'm sure Amazon didn't know until, their stock price was $1,000, but yeah, I think it's exciting. So I'm excited to be there, and we'll see what the future brings. So,
well, what drives you to be successful, and how do you define success?
Oh yeah, so that's what's weird because a lot of people define success as the role that they aspire to be in a company, or some people aspire to have a certain number of, in their salary. What's weird for me is I just want, I'm not really competing with anyone on anything. Even my personal goals of like weightlifting, I don't care what you deadlift, and I think a lot of, I think to answer the question, I think it's just to be better. So I might be better by 50% tomorrow, and then the next day I might only be better by 1%. But for me, I just want to be a better person, more efficient, smarter, more selfless, more caring. That's just what I want. I just want to be a better person. A lot of people, they want to change the world, and that's fine. I think some people want to have power, over other people, because it gives them gratification. Some people want to have money and have material things, but most of the time for me, it's just being a better human being. So like, and I think the only thing about that is when you talk about your successes, If I talk about deadlifting and saying like, I deadlifted this, if you talk about it openly, people take it as vanity. People take it as, oh, um, he's trying to say he deadlifts more than me, or you know what I mean. And a lot of times it's not even that. It's really just I'm proud of what I did for myself, and I can now I hit that thing. Now I can move on. What's the next thing I can get better at?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's tough. I think when you think like that, it's tough because there are a lot of people that just want, they see it as a personal attack. And so if you're around insecure people or people that are very competitive, they take it as a challenge to them. And so I think the way that I think is very strange. I wonder how many other people are out there that are like that, because I feel like people say that, but at the end of the day, they're really just trying to be competitive or anything like that.
What would you like to know about me?
What was your favorite place that you've lived in so far, and why? Like, why was it unique to you? God, I come up with such big questions. Look at
that. What was my favorite place that I've lived thus far, and what made it interesting and unique? So far I've spent a month in Cortez, Colorado, a month in San Francisco. I lived in Chicago for a summer. I've grown up and spent most of my life thus far in the Metro Detroit area in Huntington Woods and Oak Park. And then I spent 2.5 years on and off in New York, in Brooklyn, and now I'm in San Diego for a little bit. I think the most unique place that I've lived thus far is just for sure in New York. New York has been the most interesting place to live. It is unlike any other city out there, especially in the United States. It's just a massive density and concentration of people, which produces a lot of interesting ideas and energy and connections that you can make. You'd be standing in line, going to get a coffee and strike up a conversation, and they could be from anywhere in the world. It's a very interesting feeling to be in New York, where just being in New York, you feel interesting and cool. You know that there are so many people across the world that are just dreaming about being in New York. And as soon as you cross the city, boundary and you're in New York City, the song from Alicia Keys and Jay-Z starts playing. New York State Mind is up and at 'em. But it's just the energy that flows through the city is just what makes it the most interesting place. You see the skyscrapers everywhere, rows and rows and rows through blocks and blocks of them. And you think about that those have been built by people, that there are people living and working in those, doing all sorts of things. And then just the number of people again, and the connections that you can make in New York. And you always see people every hour of the day and night, holidays, weekends, whatever. There's always someone, and you always kind of wonder, like, where's that person going? Where's that person going? What are all these people doing here in the city? And everyone seems to come with a particular goal or aspiration or some reason to be there. People gravitate to New York just to see what they're made of and to pursue dreams. And I guess the same could be said of Hollywood. Sure, there's a lot of people that are going there to make it in the music or movie and films industry, or the movie and TV industry. But New York has so many diverse numbers of industries too: retail and finance and real estate and fashion and advertising and technology. So there isn't this monoculture, industry feeling that you can get. That you do kind of see in other large cities. Mm-hmm. So the diversity and the energy, I think, is what's made New York, again, in summary, the most interesting place. And I hope to live there again at some point.
Yeah, New York is great because, like, so when you think of a city like Chicago, it's so corporate. It's like, all right, there's a Chase here, there's a Chase 2 blocks from here, there's a Chase 3 blocks from here, and like there's a Starbucks next to the Chase, there's Quiznos next to the Chase, Subway. You're like, is there any soul in this damn city? Or is it all just, I mean, and the fact that Chicago is like one of the cleanest cities in the world, it's the the feel is so sterile and commercial and corporate and quote unquote, it just makes me feel like so white to live there. There's no, it's just so bland. And when I like I always thought, I didn't know how to explain it, but then when I went to New York, I was like, holy shit, this is just like, it's just like, I don't even know. You've got so much diversity in people, in businesses, food, just entertainment. If there's some weird thing that someone can turn into a business and someone else can take pleasure in it, it's in New York. Like you can find it. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's amazing. Yeah, I love New York as well. No, that's cool, man. It's kind of funny that you can be in all these places and New York is still the most interesting one. I feel like Christina is gonna be a little bit salty about that one because like just I don't
Right
know.
down. Well, Andy, thanks so much for doing the people just like you interview with me.
All right, no problem, man. Anytime.